Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Up next, I'm talking France. I'm joined by Damien Neven, who is Professor of Economics at the Graduate Institute of Geneva. Damien, thank you so much for coming in and seeing us again.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
No problem at all. So we're talking France today, and the French government is implementing changes in rules for merger control. Why are these changes so important to French Economy Minister Arnaud Montebourg, and how do international investors feel about this?
Yeah, of course, these rules were introduced in May in the wake of the Alstom affair, or at least the restructuring of Alstom and the alternatives that were considered for that restructuring. On the one hand, General Electric, and on the other hand, Siemens. But this law is actually an extension of a law that existed before. There was an administrative law that was introduced in 2005, which grants to the French government oversight over the acquisition of French assets when there is a public policy issue, but it was narrowed down at the time to national security and defense. And what this new law does is essentially to extend the reasons for oversight over the control of the assets. And essentially, it's a broad exemption now, or it's a broad oversight in the sense that it includes water, it includes electronic communication, it includes transport, it includes energy and the health sector. So potentially it is an extension of the original administrative law, which is of great significance. And indeed, I mean, for companies like General Electric that were subject to that were part of this debate, this is of great significance for the investment into France.
Are these changes within France, are they compatible with EU law overall?
Well, I mean, there are two perspectives that one might take with respect to compatibility with EU law. The most significant one is compatibility with the merger regulation, because, I mean, there is a merger regulation being implemented at the EU level, which essentially grants to the EU the power to control mergers that have a community dimension. And there was an article in that regulation that says, it's Article 21.4, that says that essentially member states can also implement their own control, but again, on a set of grounds, public policy grounds that are limited. And the EU directive actually mentions national security again, also the plurality of the press and prudential rules. The rule, I mean, also says that other considerations can come into play, but that the EU has to be warned about these additional considerations and has to approve them. And so what currently is happening is that the EU is considering whether the extension of the French law is indeed compatible with the merger regulation, is indeed compatible with Article 21.4. The other perspective that bears on that question is the question of whether these rules are compatible with internal market rules, in particular with respect to the mobility of capital. And there, I mean, the question really is whether the control that may be exercised with respect to investors from the EEA, I mean, are different from those that would apply to investors coming from abroad. I mean, it's currently open. I mean, whether this extension is EU compatible or not, and we will know very soon. I should mention, however, that other member states have similar rules. In particular, Germany has adopted a rule in 2009 that also grants power to the federal government to look at investment or acquisition of assets in Germany. But again, there, the public policy ground is only security, is only defense and national security. I mean, the US has rules that are similar and also focuses on national security. So the question in terms of compatibility and I guess also in terms of, I mean, France being different from the rest is really the extension of the law beyond national security and defense.
If we continue with this idea of compatibility almost, how sensible are these changes if we consider from a policy perspective?
Yeah, I think one can take several perspectives on this, and I mean, sometimes the rhetorics from the French government is a bit confused. Well, I wouldn't say confused, but at least it goes into several directions. And I mean, one of the perspectives that one can take is a question of whether it may be sensible for any government, the French government in particular, but any government, to take measures in order to ensure that employment is kept into France, or that R&D facilities, for instance, are being kept into France as a consequence of an acquisition. I think that the academic literature, I mean, tends to suggest that the identity of the investor really doesn't matter. Whether the acquirer is coming from the US or whether it's coming from another member state or whether it's another French company doesn't really matter in terms of employment, in terms of the profitability of the business after the acquisition. There is, however, one dimension in which the identity of the investor may matter, which is the location of R&D facilities. And I mean, there it seems that there is evidence that if you are being acquired by a foreign investor, it's more likely that R&D is going to be repatriated towards the country of that investor. So, I mean, there may be a ground, arguably, for governments to intervene in that perspective. Now, the second dimension or the second perspective that one can take is with respect to this rhetoric that governments should be allowed to have strategic sectors or to target strategic sectors, in particular because the Chinese are doing it or whoever, but I mean sort of foreign governments are doing it, so that it would be naive for Europeans not to implement similar rules in defining strategic sectors when others are doing it. I think that this is largely a non-issue because I think that the EU state aid rules already allow for that. I think that, I mean, if a case can be made that there has been some targeting by a foreign government in a particular sector, I mean, the EU state aid rules actually allow the member states to themselves to grant more R&D support, for instance, or even to target particular sectors in return. So I think that it's pretty much a non-issue. I mean, the third perspective that one could take is probably the more fundamental one, which is the question of whether the current EU merger control rule actually give enough weight in the decision to the efficiency that can arise as a consequence of the merger, as a consequence of the restructuring, relative to the consequences in terms of consumer harm and in terms of the potential exercise of market power. And I think that there again, I mean, there is an issue. I don't think that the rules should be changed, but I mean, an argument can be made, probably, that the EU authorities have not given enough credence to the claims that the companies were putting forward with respect to the efficiency benefits that may arise as a consequence of the transaction. So that maybe one of the consequences of this current discussion is indeed going to lead the European authorities to pay more attention to efficiencies, not necessarily to change the rules, but to implement them differently.
Damien, thank you so much for coming and sharing your insight with us. Thank you.
Thank you, it's a pleasure. Mm-hmm.
Damien Neven will be back with us shortly to discuss that recent Intel judgment. For now, though, it's goodbye from me.